Welcome to shul.com. We are here at the Surfside Night Seder, and we are learning Parashat Vayigash from Otzar Pelaot HaTorah. A lot of always interesting secrets in this book. So let's begin. It's the first pasuk. It's Perek Mem Daled Pasuk Yudchet. Vayigash Elav Yehuda. Vayomed bi Adoni yedaberna abdecha davar beozne Adoni va'ilichar apecha be'abdecha ki chamocha keparo. So I'll explain to you in English. So Yehuda approaches Yosef, and he tells him, "Bi Adoni, my master, yedaberna abdecha. Please, your servant wants to say something in your ear. Davar beozne Adoni, something in my master's ear. And don't get mad with your servant, ki kamocha ke paro, because you are just like Paro." Okay, let's take a look. It says here, Chamato shel Yehuda, the anger of Yehuda. B'midrash Tanchuma, it says in the midrash in Siman Gimel Ita, Kishaita Chamato shel Yehuda ola, when he would get mad, Hayushtish se'arot yosot mitoch libo v'korot et begadav. Two hairs would protrude out of his clothing from his area of his heart, and they would rip through his clothing and just stick out. Two hairs. And when he wanted to request that his anger would come up, he would fill his belt that was made out of leather with pieces of copper that are the size of the seeds of peas. Tiny little pieces of copper, he would fill them up. And when he was mad, in order to control his anger, he would take the little pieces of copper, put them in his mouth, and chew on them, so the people would see that he's chewing copper with his teeth, and nothing was happening. And he would get mad. When Yosef saw that he started to get angry, the hairs were sticking out, he started chewing on the copper. He said, if I don't stop him right now, he might come and start to destroy all of the country of Egypt. Right away he tells his brother, Ani Yosef Achichem, I'm your brother. Don't just chill out. And they didn't know what to answer him back when he said that. When they were so mad, they were about to fight, and suddenly Yosef tells them, I'm your brother. And they're bewildered. Okay, let's take a look at the note on the bottom. It says, Lashon HaMidrash Tanchuma, Amar Rabbi Yudan, Kishaita Hamatos Yehuda Ola, when Yehuda would get angry, two hairs would come out of his heart and rip through the clothing. When he wanted to increase his hamato, his anger, he would go and put inside of his belt made out of leather these little pieces of copper, like we said earlier. They would chew on them. He says it's compared to two people that were fighting or arguing. When one of them feels that the other one's going to win, now he's going to win me. I'm going to be embarrassed in front of everybody. He ends up kissing the hand of the one that he knows is going to win in order to calm him down. He saw how angry Yehuda was getting. He was worried that if Yehuda ends up going to battle and winning, he's going to be embarrassed in front of all of Egypt. Also, Yosef. He tells him right away, I'm your brother, and they could not answer him. Interesting. Vanomed El Adoni lo yuchal hana la'azov et aviv va'azav et aviv va'met u'kachtem gam et ze me'im panai ve'karau ason. So this is in Mem Daled. It's Kaf Bet through Kaf Tet. He brings a bunch of two pesukim here, and he says we couldn't bring up the Na'ad, who's talking about Binyamin. to leave his father after the first Yosef went missing for Rachel Imenu. We don't want to risk taking Binyamin, and if he would leave his father permanently, his father probably is going to die. And if you're going to take this boy now, there's going to be a catastrophe. So Binyamin hayab mitapech leze'ev. So it says here that Binyamin used to, we'll say he used to become a werewolf from time to time. Let's take a look what that means. Hachida, the Chida Rabbeinu Chaim Yosef David Azlai, Besifro Devash Lefi Ma'arechet Zayin Ot Tet Vav and Tet Zayin Levi. He brings Beshem Perush Rabbeinu Ephraim Zal. He brings by Rabbeinu Ephraim, who was one of the Geonim. Kan Pasuk Kaftet Shekatav Devarim Niflaim Beyoted. He says something unbelievable about Binyamin. Shekasher Lo Holmam Al Derech Pshat. And you almost can't even explain it according to the Pshat. Ki ma shekatu b'Torah, like it says in the Torah, Bereshit Mem Tet Kaf Zayin, Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf, that Benjamin is a wolf that devours. Eno mashal be'alma. That's not a parable or a mashal of a comparison. Rak le'itim, there were times hayam mitapech leze'ev hayatoret ben adam. He would convert from a human to a wolf, and he would rip apart and eat people. Only when he was by his father, he was like almost by a doctor and relaxed. And he didn't turn to a wolf. So what Yehudah was telling Yosef, you may not know your younger brother. When he's by his father, it's okay, but when he's not, he might become a werewolf and start attacking, and you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So this is what Yehudah tells Yosef, and I tell my master, Lo yuchal na la'azov et aviv. You don't understand. He can't leave his father. Va'azav et aviv v'amet. And if he leaves his father, he'll die. Begam amar b'karau ason, and there will also be catastrophe. Haino kishi yipared me'aviv, that when he will leave or be separated from his father, yahafoch lezehev, he's going to turn to a werewolf. Le'ovre derachim, the people that are walking in the way, like on the pathways. Va'alideze haya kol motzo yahargeo kedesh lo yazik. Anyone that's going to try to come after him is going to end up killing. You're not going to be successful holding him down. He says, look also what I have in Parashat Vayechi, which we'll probably get up to. This is interesting things about the children of the Avot, the Shevatim. Vayetzeh ha'achad me'iti va'amar ach tarof toraf ve'lo li'itiv adhenna. So what happened was they're telling the story over to Yosef about Yosef that they told their father, and one of them, Vayetzeh ha'echad, one of them, Me'iti, what came from me, Ba'omar, and Yaakov said, Ach tarof toraf. So, he was devoured and ripped apart. But lo li'iti v'adhenna, and I have not seen him from that day until now. Just as a side note, it wasn't the brothers that said that he got devoured, tarof toraf. That was actually Yaakov, who, when he saw the garments, the garments that were bloodied by the goat's blood, and goat's blood looks similar to human, then he said at that point, tarof toraf. He made the claim, but the brothers actually never said that. Yaakov chashash she'achaya bardelas nashach et Yosef. Yaakov thought that this wild animal, the bardelas, nashach et Yosef. It's the one that bit Yosef. Hachatam sofer kan betorat Moshe dibur machir taref or toraf. כתב דבר נפלא בביאור הפסוק וזה לשונו. נראה שיעקב אבינו לא חשש שיוסף מת. Yaakov really never thought that Yosef died. Yaakov thought what? כיוון שלא נראה עליו בשום פעם בחלום. He said because if he really had died, he would have been able, or would have seen him in a dream. And so he knew that he wasn't dead physically. He knew that he was alive the whole time. But he thought that he might have snapped mentally, and he was living amongst animals or living in the wilderness.
Was he mourning?
Yeah, so Yaakov mourned, and that's one of the reasons why one of the Mefarshim bring down that he knew for sure that he was still alive, because he was mourning for more than a year. When somebody passes away from a family, after a year, the feelings internally, of course, they stay, and the person remembers the deceased, but the strong feelings start to dissipate if the person had truly passed away and was buried, or even not buried. But if the person had truly passed away, then it would dissipate. The fact that he was going 20 years and still mourning him in that capacity where he still felt him alive was because he was alive physically. Otherwise, after a year, those feelings would have went away, and he would have been able to get over it. There's a wild animal called the bardelas, and he has a note about which we'll get to. That the bite of this wild animal affects the mind of a person. That's what he said. Yaakov tarof toraf. What does that mean? Shenitraf b'da'ato. Maybe he got bit, and something in his mind became taref, became impure. Meaning, I think the best way to explain this, as I said, mishum delor yitiv ad hena, and he says, because I didn't see him until now. Meaning, in a dream, that means he must have been alive physically. I think the best way to explain this would be something like a rabies, where rabies doesn't necessarily kill the person. It makes him, mentally incapable of doing certain things. That's kind of, I guess, what this is kind of referencing. He has a note on the bottom here. B'masechet Baba Kama, daf tet vav amud bet. Moneh HaMishnah et hachayot shemu'adot lahazik. The Mishnah tells us a list of different animals that can attack and hurt and damage. Haze'ev, that's the wolf. V'ha'ari, that's the lion. V'hanamer, that's the tiger. V'habardelas, the bardelas, which we'll look up in a moment. V'hanachash, and the snake. Hare elu mu'adin. These are mu'ad. They attack. V'gemara sham, in the Gemara on Tet Vav Amud Aleph Ita says, "My bardelas." What is a bardelas? Amar Rabbi Yehuda nifreza. He says it's called a nifreza. My nifreza. So what's a nifreza? Amar Rav Yosef apa. He says an apa. So we'll look it up now. Ubetiferet Israel al Mishnayot, in this book Tiferet Israel on the Mishnayot in Baba Kama, and then he has over here the Perek Aleph Memdal Tziyin leHatosafot Masechet Sanhedrin on top daf Tet Vav Amud Bet Dibur Melchel Bardelas shekatvu sheyesh shnei minei bardelas. There's two different types of bardelas. We're going to look it up in a minute also online. Echad hu min haya katana ke'en hulda. It's a small wild haya that's like a hulda. The hulda is the let me give you the English on it. The weasel is the right word. The weasel. Ve'echad hu min ez az beyote b'darko la'amit et ha'adan. And then the other one is one that's more wild and brazen, that goes out to kill people. Some animals are wild, but if you don't provoke them, you don't look at them, like even if there are ways that they would go. Then there's ones that actually go and attack. They say like one wild, crazy one is a polar bear. A polar bear. That's I saw once. I love reading about like these animals and how God created all the animals, how they live and things like that. That in like these places up north, Canada, Alaska, where they have these polar bears, they have these cages made out of steel because they can break down doors and windows and break through walls. So they actually have cages that if they ever see a polar bear or like there's an attack, they go into a special cage that's made out of steel that the polar bear can't penetrate. Just as a side note, it's interesting to know that. Wow. So there are, because polar bear is one of the most dangerous. I know the Coca-Cola commercials, they make them so gentle and loving and kind. Grab a Coke. Yeah, but that's nothing. That's farthest from the truth on those. So he says this other one is it's like the weasel, but it goes after humans and it attacks them, and it's from the families of cats, of wild cats, I guess. Leopard. So he says it's called a leopard. That's how you would, as opposed to namer, the tiger. This would be the leopard. In the Aruch, it says something unbelievable. B'sheva shanim harishonot hi zachar. In the first 7 years of its life, it's a male. V'az nikrat sabua. Then it's called a sabua. V'achar kach mitapech nekeva. And then it converts from being a male to being a female. V'nikrit nifreza. And because it becomes what's called nifreza, like the Gemara mentioned over there. V'az hi ra'a yotir min zachar. And if she becomes worse than when she was a male. V'yesh l'tzayin, and we could look up Yosef HaSadik nitapech min nekeva lezachar, and we could say that same thing on Yosef HaSadik that went from being a female to a male. What does that mean, a female to a male? Because it said that originally Leah, when she had her 7th pregnancy, she saw Beruach HaKodesh that she had a male in her belly, and she was worried that if she had another male, that meant that when Rachel was pregnant at that same time, she would be holding a female. And she didn't want that the maidservants, Bilha and Zilpa, would end up having 2 of males, Shevatim, and then her own sister, her own blood from the main wife would not. So she prayed that God would switch the genders between her and her sister, and seemingly she was answered. It goes to show you the power of Leah Imenu's prayer. We underestimate Leah because we want to say Rachel nevakal baneha, of course Rachel, but don't underestimate Leah Imenu. She switches it and gives back. Kind of, you don't realize kind of like the midah keneged midah, the karma you might call it, of originally getting the signs from her sister, and then the Mefarshim bring down that had she not given the signs, she would have not had any zechuyot to have any children. Because she gave them up, she ended up having children.
Wow.
And
That's incredible.
and so it mentions here that Yosef was really supposed to be female, but ended up getting switched. So that's why he mentions that Yosef used to play with his hair. Not that he had a tendency to, is that was his tendency, or that Dinah would go out like the boys. What do you mean Dinah go out like the boys? That's not something that a daughter of one of the Avot, Yaakov Avinu, would fall into.
Wow.
It's that was her true nature originally. And don't tell me it's so far-fetched. What are you talking about? We say the same thing about Yitzhak, that Yitzhak also was barren, that he had a soul that was a female soul, whatever that means. But we'll accept it on the basis that there are things like that souls can be in that capacity, and that during the Akedah, it ended up getting switched. And there's an interesting part on that. So, Hasadik mitapech min nekeva l'zachar, dugmat ha'bardela, shu mitapech min zachar l'nekeva, v'ayin ma shekatavti b'zeh b'parashat Vayetze. It says, take a look what I wrote in Parashat Vayetze, under Lamed-Kaf Aleph. Interesting. Okay, let's continue. Vayetze ha'echad me'iti va'omar ach tarof toraf le'iti v'adhenna. Okay, so that is on the Bardelas. Let's go to the next passage. Vayomer Yosef el echav geshuna elai vayigash. So Yosef, at the end, when he tells them, listen, I'm your brother, he says, please come closer to me, and they come in order to see him and feel him. So before we continue, it's important to know this is in Mem Hey Pasuk Dalid. Vayom Yosef elechav geshuna na elai, come close to me. Vayigash, they come. Vayomer ani Yosef achem asher mechatem oti mitzrayim. I am your brother that you sold me down here to Egypt, and he calls it Mitzrayim, not Mitzrayim. There's a whole hadush on that. Now, what's interesting is, how did they not recognize that it was him? So according to one of the Mefarshim I saw, is that he always wore a face mask at all times. Now, it is true that the Egyptians wore makeup, and that's well known that they wore makeup in a way, even the men and kings and all the royalty.
Eyeliner, all that stuff.
Eyeliner and things like that. But it says on Yosef that he actually wore a mask all the time, so nobody would see his face, and nobody actually spoke directly to him. He always had a translator, which was his son. Ephraim be a translator, Ephraim and Menashe, but Ephraim would be the translator.
What would be the logic behind him having to choosing to wear a mask? When we get, God willing, when we get to probably another few weeks, we'll start 30 days before Purim. We're going to start on Achashverosh and on the Megillah. We're going to talk about the history, and then we're going to go inside Belinid into the details of the stories, the 10 Perakim of Megillat Esther. That Achashverosh, it says that he had advisors, And his advisors were the only ones who actually knew what his face looked like. Everybody else, he did not show his face. He wore a mask. There's lots of reasons for this. One of them is for safety. People were out to kill these royal members, and if you look, all of them were killed. Very few of them died on their deathbed. They said there was one on one of the Gedolim, I think it was Rav Cutler, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on the rabbi, was one of the Gedolim that he got visited once by the head of the Italian mafia. This was one of the mafia families from Brooklyn, the big Italian mafia. I don't know if it was the Bonanno family or the Genovese family, but they went to visit him and to get a beracha for something. He had an issue. He went to get a beracha from one of the Gedolim, and one of the Gedolim gave him a beracha that he should live a long life and die in his deathbed. And this mafia head started crying and he started tearing up. And he said, and like they asked, I said, what's so great about that blessing? He said, that's exactly what the head of a mafia would want, is to die at old age on his deathbed, not being murdered or buried, upstate in the Catskills, from out of the back of a car. So, and if I'm not mistaken, he ended up living till 97 or 98, and he lived a long life, and he died on his deathbed. So it was interesting. The beracha, the Gedolim, always are chal, and they last. Okay, so Yosef here, I guess he takes off his mask. They see his true face, or maybe it says he couldn't hold up anymore, so he went to the bathroom to cry. Could be that he had makeup on, he took his makeup off, and then he came out, and they saw him after, he washed his face, possibly. I'm giving you a lot of the different mefarshim and midrashim all together, so that we can paint the picture in our imagination what's going on here. It's more than just the text. There's a lot of depth inside. So let's look at the Shagat Yehuda. Shagat Yehuda hipila et Yosef mikis'o. So the roar of Judah pushed Yosef off of his chair. So I guess while the two hairs stuck out from his chest, and while he starts chewing on the copper, he probably blew a wild yell, and the vibrations of his yell knocked him off of his chair. So Brother Yosef knew that he had to give in quickly. But Midrash Tanchuma says in the Midrash Tanchuma, so as a side note, who wrote this Midrash Tanchuma? So it's written by Rabbi Tanchum, who's from the Kfar Tanchum in Israel, and this rabbi was born as an orphan from his father. His father had passed away, and the mother was raising the boy alone, and she was worried that the boy possibly would not grow up in the way of the Torah without a father to teach him and to guide him, and she was worried he might go out into the streets. So she was very careful that every time she fed him a meal at night, she would make two portions. One portion for him, and an exact same portion, she would wrap it up and go look for somebody poor in the town and the village that was hungry and feed it to him. At the same time, she would feed her son as a zichut for him. And that self-sacrifice of the mother led to Rabbi Tanchum becoming who he was. And he wrote this Midrash Tanchuma. He's buried in Israel. You can actually visit his kever in Israel. Rav Musafi talks about him all the time. That this is one of the kevarim that we know is accurate kever, as opposed to some of them in Israel, which is not so well known, as so accurate. Two of them that Rav Musafi questions is Yonatan ben Uziel, that one of being the exact location of him, and the other one of the Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzatu, buried in Tveria next to Rabbi Akiva. He states that when he was young, neither of those existed, and so I always put on the record that he makes the claim that when he was a kid, none of those were there, and that today they're there. So it's quite possible those are not the accurate locations of those two. There was an unbelievable miracle that was done by Yehuda. Then right away, when they saw that he was starting to admit this, they kind of picked up already, this is probably Yosef that's in front of us. They wanted to kill him. They said, now is our chance. Yarad malach upazaram be'arba pinot habayit. Right away an angel came down and with a force pushed all the brothers to the four corners of the room. They were out to kill him, but an angel came and defended him. Right away Yehuda screams a loud screech. And suddenly all the walls and buildings in Egypt collapse. Suddenly cracks in all the foundations, everyone escapes, almost like an earthquake of all the buildings. And all the animals that were in Egypt had miscarriages. If they were pregnant, they all had miscarriages. Yosef fell from his chair, and Paro fell from his chair as well. And all the guards that were around Yosef to protect him, their faces became sad. And their faces never went back to their normal position. After they saw that event, it affected them mentally and internally, that they continued their job, but they never ever smiled or went back to their old self. And the voice was heard in the entire house of Paro. And that voice was the voice of Judah. Shama Hashem Kol Yehuda. Hashem heard, the Lord heard the voice of Judah. Kevan Shera'a Yosef Sha'ita Lehem Busha Gdula. That when Yosef saw that all of his guards had this big embarrassment, Amar Lahem, and also the brothers, Amar Lahem Geshu Na'alai Vayigash, he said, please come close to me. And every one of the brothers came and kissed him and cried on him. He kissed all of his brothers and they cried on him. There was another miracle that was brought down in the Midrash, that when he admitted who he was, they were so shocked that they fainted and their souls left their bodies. They collapsed and their souls left. And God had to resurrect their souls to come back, because it was such a shocking and embarrassing experience to see that this was the kid that they let down, and years later, 20 plus years later, after making their father suffer, he's now in front of them, ruling them. They couldn't accept, and their souls left. So it's unbelievable. It's a great book. This book, Otzar Pelot, is.
What's it called?
It's called Otzar Pelot Torah. It's a book by this individual. It's a businessman, supposedly in Brooklyn. That's what I heard. His name is Zickerman. I call him Rabbi Zickerman. God willing, maybe if he comes down to Miami, we invite him, talk to him. So it's a beautiful book, done really fantastic. Okay, let's continue. Hanolad mahul milato shone mish'ar kol adam. So it says here, a person who's born circumcised, his circumcision on his brit milah is different than every other person. Just as a side note, the Gemara mentions that 7 people were born with a brit milah. One of them being Bil'am, not Jewish. Noach is another one of them. Adam, Shet, it goes through a few of them. Yaakov, I believe it's also Yosef. And it's interesting that, you even had a non-Jew that was born that way. But when they are born that way, the 7, they do what's called hakazat dam, where they just take a drop of blood for commemorative purposes. Rashi explains, Yosef mahul. So one of the ways that Yosef proved himself is that he showed them that he had a circumcision, which was not something that the Egyptians did. It's actually something the Egyptians despised. They ended up doing it when Yosef became leader, because he forced them all to do it in order to buy food. Then they sold their properties. He had a process in what he did. And
so let me ask you. So I understand he had a mask and they didn't recognize him. So now he goes, he cries, comes back without a mask, and they clearly say, see, hey, that's Yosef, But he still needed to prove himself further by showing him he was circumcised?
Yes, because I don't think that he had to further prove it, but they probably were so in shock.
Right.
It could be, you have to understand something about the Egyptians. They used to do a lot of things with black magic. And they were able to do things, and it's possible that they could have converted themselves, their bodies, in their forms into a different way. We know that they converted a stick into a snake in front of Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon, and they made it like a joke. They took little kindergarten kids that did that. What is that trying to tell us? That they did this type of magic. And we already know that from other sources that the Egyptians that were in Egypt were black. And Yosef was white-skinned. He was, maybe you want to say he was a brown, but whitish brown. He was a lighter skin than them. It was clearly recognizable that he wasn't from them. And also, it was brought down in a different place that I found that he looked in similar like his uncle. Which uncle? Like Esav. And he had red hair and blue or green eyes. He didn't look like them. He had a special look on him. The Rabbi Manis Friedman, when he was here recently, told me that they actually found in Egypt a statue of Yosef HaSadiq sitting down on a chair, and he has curly red hair and blue eyes. I don't know how they knew the color. Maybe they painted it. I'm not sure. I tried to look it up and research it. I didn't find it. Well, he's going to be back here again. We've had him here already 3 or 4 times on Shul.com. So hopefully when he comes back again, I spoke with his son Zalman not too long ago. So when he comes down, we'll ask him again about it, because it was very fascinating. We spoke about it for about an hour, about the detail, about all this research on it. He looked into it a lot, which I found was fantastic. It would be another nice historical piece to tie into the Mefarshim to see, because alone these archaeological finds are not enough. We always want to tie them into the Mefarshe Torah, the Rishonim, the Gemara, and see how that is the Ikar, and then tie it into it. So he shows them that he has this circumcision. You have to remember, like I told you, the whole Egypt for the most part was circumcised, because it was already the year of the famine, and he already had took all their properties, their money, their crops. He was all in it. So I guess he showed them in some way that he was mahul, but it must mean that because he was born circumcised, it didn't look like it was circumcised. I say that because if everyone else in Egypt was circumcised, what difference would it make that he showed them that to him? Nothing. So this is what he's trying to say here, is that someone who's born circumcised, it doesn't look like a normal situation. Well, the source of this is from the Midrash Rabbah. Perush hatur ala Torah diborat marchil geshu hikshe alze. So the tur, that's the Baal HaTurim, he had a difficulty on this. The fact that Yosef was circumcised doesn't mean that was Yosef. Even the Arabs at that time, which were the children of Ishmael, which were the ones that brought him down to Egypt, mind you, they were also circumcised. Circumcision was not limited at that time even to just Jews. Leave aside that he made all the Egyptians do it. The Ishmaelim were doing it. Many of the students of Avraham Avinu did it. When everyone saw the miracle that happened to Avraham, other people took upon themselves this. Until today, we have many non-Jews around the world. In fact, Jews are nowhere even near the majority of people that circumcise themselves. There's 2 billion Arabs in the world that circumcise themselves. And there's others that do it for medical purposes, and there's other religions that do it too.
I mean, I'm not sure, but don't today most hospitals, don't they?
They offer it. They offer it today. I mean, hospitals became completely woke, where today they don't even tell the parents if it's a boy or girl. In New York, I recently found out from a few Orthodox couples that the doctor would not tell them, or could not tell them, according to the policy, if it was a boy or girl. He just said, it's a baby. Okay, I thank you so much. But this goes to show you a little bit of like the almost like revolution that's going on. Listen, it doesn't nothing to affect my life in the sense, but it's just something that, as a Jew who reads Jewish history and sees the rise and fall of empires, it shows the breaking of what America once was. For whatever that means. Sometimes change is good, sometimes change is not good, but this seemingly looks like something that's not so positive. Even the Arabs were circumcised. So what good does it that the Midrash is telling us that he showed it to them? So maybe they said, maybe this guy Joseph is an Arab. Maybe he's our cousin. Maybe he knew about the story. You have to remember, other people knew that Yosef was missing. It said that Yitzhak Avinu even knew that he was alive. Through prophecy he knew. And the Tur has even... He has even another issue. Like I told you earlier, even the Egyptians were circumcised. And if you look at the Midrash Rabbah, it says it further. So what is it? So it says the Shach, that the Siptei Kohen on the Torah, and Dibur Markel Vayom Yosef, Liyashev Perush Rashi, Yosef Nolad Mahul. He wanted to explain this, that it says that he was born Mahul. He has a big note on the bottom, which we'll read now. He showed them not that he was circumcised, but that he was born circumcised. So there clearly was something different. Now we also know Yaakov was born circumcised, and I'm going to assume that when Yaakov did Brit Milah for the children, that he probably taught all of the children how to do Brit Milah. I'm going to assume that all the Shevatim knew how to do Shechita, Brit Milah, and all the other mitzvot. That's, for me, that would be standard. There's clearly a visible difference between a Brit Milah that was born Mahul versus one that was done by a human being. And the in Yud Bet Dash Gimel, he says in regards to those today that think that they're or say that they're born Mahul, I have a discussion later on. But the Gemara mentions that only 7 people were born Mahul. I heard that there was someone in Brooklyn that his father was Mohel for like 30 or 40 years, and when he had a son, his son was born circumcised. I don't know if it's true. I heard it. I asked the kid, and he didn't really answer me. But my father had mentioned it to me years ago. I don't know. We don't really know, but just as a side note. But again, I don't believe it, only because if the Gemara mentions 7, it's probably something special in it, but maybe. Okay, let's look in the bottom on the note that he has here.
But you're saying even if he was born circumcised, would he still have to
Hakazat Dam? Yes, that I know for sure, because I studied Hilchot Brit Milah from this book called Brit Shelema. Beautiful book that talks about Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, Temanim, all different customs, Hasidu. It's a really great book on it. And when I was training to look and to learn about Brit Milah, it was really interesting, actually, believe it or not. Okay, so he says on the bottom, Kedi'ita b'minash rabah Parashat Vayeshev, v'zeh l'shonam, ele toldot Yaakov Yosef. When it says, these are the toldot, the children, Yaakov, Yosef, lo haya tzarich kara lememar ken ela ele toldot Yaakov Reuven. It should have said, these are the children of Yaakov, not Yosef. It should say Reuven first. He was the first by a long shot. What do I mean long shot? By something like 14 years that Rachel was barren. Ela matamud lomar Yosef. So why does it say Joseph? Ela shekol ma she'ira lazeh ira lazeh. That everything that happened to Yaakov in his lifetime, many of the events also were with Yosef. Ma ze nolad mahul, af ze nolad mahul. Just like this one was born circumcised, this is where the other one was born circumcised. V'chen itam b'midrash shocher tov, and in the midrash it says mizmortet shemone et Yosef ben elu shnadu mehudim. So he said it lists over there in the midrash those that were born circumcised. Ze echad miyud gimel shnadu mehudim. So over there in that location it says the 13 that were born mehudim. Adam Arishon, number 1, Shet 2, Chanoch 3, Noach 4, Shem 5, Terach 6. Terach is the father of Abraham. Yaakov is the next. Yosef, Moshe Rabbeinu, Shemuel HaNavi, David HaMelech, Yeshaya HaNavi, and Yirmiyah HaNavi. So there it has 13. Ulam, B'midrash Tanchuma Parashat Noach, in the midrash in Tanchuma on the Parashat Noach and Siman Hey Cheshiv Rak Shiv'ah Shenoldu. That's what I told you, Mehudim. There are 7 that I remember earlier. V'zeh Lashon Tanchuma. That's the midrash Tanchuma, Rabbi Tanchum that we were talking about earlier. Tamim, ze echad shiv'a mehudim shenoldu ba'olam. So when it says the word tamim, it talks about those that were born mehudim. Umachshev umone kol hanoladim mehudim ve'eluhem. These are the seven: Adam Arishon, Shet, Noach, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe, Iyov. So there's actually a difference between this. Obviously, the other one is 13, so it has more, but it actually adds. Which are the ones that it adds? It adds specifically Iyov. That's the only one that the first one doesn't have. It has all the other 6. Adam, Rishon, Shet, Noach, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe. It has Iyov. That's Job. Ubashach ala Torah, the Siptei Kohen on the Torah. Haytalo girsa bechaza shayu shnim esre. He had 12. Shenoldu mehudim ubemidrashim hadukim hem. And so you have 3 different opinions. You have the Shach, who had 12. You had the Madrash Tanchuma that had 7. And then you had Midrash Shocher Tov that had 13. 13, 12, or 7. You make your pick. I believe the Gemara is 7, from what I remember last. Ze Lashon HaShach. ואפשר שמא שיהיה להם שהוא מהול, הוא שיוסף נולד מהול, והוא אחד מ12 שנולדו מהולים, לזה הראה להם שמי שנולד מהול אינו כמילת בשר ודם. So that's the Shach. He's bringing down that Yosef had showed them that he was born mahul, and clearly they understood from this, from their education of Brit Milah, that it clearly was unique. So that's interesting. Okay, let's continue. He said, so now we're on Pasuk Memhe, which is 45 dash, that's Perek 45, Pasuk 22. Lechulam natan la'ish chalifot semalot, and so to everybody he gave them chalifot semalot, dresses, long dresses. What would we call that? We would call today what's in the Arab world jalabiyas. A jalabiyah, like a long cloak. It was the dress that they wore back then. Our forefathers wore them. My grandfather wore them. My father wears it still now. He wears it when he's home. It's the garb. One of it is it's a very modest sanua garb in which it doesn't show the body parts of even a man, the shape of a man. Where for the most part it keeps it modest. There is a big inyan of being modest for both male and female. Today the custom is to wear, males wear tight pants and tight shirts, and there's a whole lot to say about it. Not that it's asud, but it's not modest. It's not the modest way. I know we do it because that's the fashion today, and it's the fitted, it's custom, and it gives that look. But the original way of the Jewish garb is a modest dress. There's something to say about that. So, Hatam shenatan Yosef begadim lehashevatim. Why did Yosef give clothing to the Shevatim? Beperush hachiskuni, in the Chiskuni, the French perush in commentary, Besefer Panei Achraza, and in the book Panei Achraza, Natnu ta'am nifla lema natan Yosef l'shevatim halifot semalot. Why did he give them these type of garments, these jalabiyas? What were they, out of clothing? Were they missing clothing that they needed a new wardrobe? Some Egyptian fine cotton? What were they looking? What was he doing here? And what is this word halifot? I know what semalot means. Semalot are dresses, male dresses. Okay, they were not wearing anything other than these male jalabiyas. But what's this word halifot? Why did he give them garments? Because when they discovered in the bag of Benjamin, in Binyamin, this cup that belonged, they were so scared they all ripped their garments and did kiri'ah because they realized they were in trouble. They ripped their garments. So after he admitted all this to them, they were all sitting there with ripped garments, and we can assume they were ripped in a capacity that it was very visible. Because Yosef caused them to rip their garments, because he told his servants and his guards, you put this inside of Binyamin's bag. That's why he did what's called chalaf. Chalaf is like a transfer, or to reciprocate. So it says chalifot semalot. Why chalifot? Because he was the cause of why it got ripped to begin with. So he gave them the achlif, like almost a change of it. So interesting point on that. ולאביו שלח כזאת 10 חמורים נושאים מטוב מצרים ו10 אתונות נושאות בד ולחם ומזון לאביו לדרך. So when he ends up sending his brothers back, he sends to his father 10 donkeys laden from all the good goods of Egypt, the best delicacies, the best foods. ו10 אתונות and 10 female donkeys נושאות בד ולחם, types of bread and food, umazon la'achiv ladarech, so that when his father travels back down, he's going to have a lot of food and everyone's going to be well taken care of when they're coming. The son needs to give his father a gift. Why did Joseph send his father any gifts? We have to look at what it says there in the Midrash, in Midbar Rabba. Why does the son have to give his father a gift? Mita'am mitzvat kibud av. Out of respect to the father, the son should give him a gift. Because Yosef was not in his father's house for 22 years, he wanted to respect his father in a very large way, in a very audacious way. So he sent his father gifts, and by this he can make up a little bit of what, unfortunately, the 22 years of not also communicating with his father, which is in a different discussion, which we'll hopefully go into this week, God willing. Baruch Adonai le'olam, Amen ve'amen.